Good evening, everyone. I'm Lee Softly. I'm serving as the Dean and President of the University of Maine School of Law, and it is my honor and privilege to welcome you here tonight to the 12th Annual Maine Law Justice for Women Lecture. The lecture tonight, Sexism, Lies, and the Fight for the Truth, A Reporter's Story, will be presented by Patrícia Campos Mello, who is with us this evening after a whirlwind week of meeting and talking and engaging with people all through the state of Maine. And it's not over. If you know Kathy Lee, you know there are 2 more days of that work. So we're going to cheer for amazing work. For more than a decade, the Justice for Women Lecture has provided the opportunity for all of us to expand our knowledge and our global perspective on an amazing range of issues critical to all of humanity. Having met and heard from tonight's speaker, I must say that it is an extraordinary honor to welcome you to this particular event, where once again we'll have the opportunity to really consider very deeply some of the most challenging aspects of our time. Not just freedom of the press, but courage of the press, responsibility of the press, and the centrality of a free and accurate press to democracy. You'll hear more on that soon. Before we go any further, though, I have to say a big thank you to Kathy Lee. And we'll have many chances to cheer, and I think it's very important that everyone recognizes how difficult it is to keep traditions going as the world changes. Kathy has been a supporter of this lecturer. She has been absolutely indefatigable, making sure it happened. Beginning in 2012, she raised funds, identified priority topics, inspired and perhaps cajoled speakers from around the world, engaged interested groups, brought in our youth, which is really key, and has kept this critically important tradition even in the middle of a pandemic. So I just want to once again, as we begin this wonderful evening, thank Kathy for her inspiring energy and determination. We would not be here without her. So we're going to do that one more time. And a few more thanks before we get to the awards for the night. From Maine Law, we have several people who have 27 jobs just to keep the law school going and have helped us get here tonight. So I'm going to ask Justine Satterthwaite, Rob Pareca, and Nicole Vinal all to stand and accept our thanks. She doesn't take orders well. I'm working on that. Something about losing my last job, I just don't have that authority anymore. So the other thing that it's important for everyone to know is that we have 2 students greeting you today, and these students are just about to take their finals. This is reading week. Every single hour is important to law students in reading week, and they are here because this is such an important night. So Eloise Melcher, Alicia Ray, are you here? We're going to bring them in and we're going to cheer for them. And my dad is calling me. You'll forgive me if I take a quick call. Love my dad. Eloise and Alicia. So if they do terrible on those exams, we'll all know we were the cause. Yeah, she's all right. So it is now my honor to move to one of the fun things about this evening, which is the award of Courage is Contagious Award. I have on several occasions asked Kathy if we couldn't do something that was more speakable, but Courage is Courageous Award. Contagious. You'll be hearing from my lawyers. All right. Courage is Contagious Award is given to community leaders advancing justice for women in Maine and beyond. The women earning this award have embodied the spirit, the hard work, and the dedication that the Justice for Women lecture highlights every year. I am delighted and honored to announce this year's award winners, where there is so much great work being done that we have had to announce 2 winners this year. And the winners are Claudette Nanendahazi. How'd I do, Claudette? Where are you? And Abusana Mickey Bono. And I'm going to ask you, where are you? Just wave. There we go. In a minute. You're going to hear from them in just a moment, but I want just a little bit of an introduction, because both of these amazing women are doing a huge number of things in the world, but we really noted their work within her presence. That's a nonprofit organization in Maine created by and for women, serving immigrant women in the state and helping them to achieve their professional and personal goals. The mission of this organization says it all. It's organized and led by immigrant women living in Maine. We strive to bring together immigrant women from across communities and generations to ensure that Maine's economic agenda includes the aspirations and needs of immigrant women. It's an amazing mission, and they are doing just extraordinary work. Claudette has a bachelor's degree in administrative management from the University of Burundi and was a national sales manager, everybody pay attention, a national sales manager for a beverage brewery whose majority stockholder was Heineken. Always welcome, Claudette. Claudette immigrated to the U.S. from Burundi, an experience she draws on when supporting other migrant women into Maine. She's a leader whose grassroots approaches creates force multipliers through networks and volunteers. And when you hear from her, you will understand how people in need are drawn to her welcoming and non-judgmental warmth. Good, that's good, yes. Mickey Bondo is a co-founder and program director of In Her Presence, who arrived in the U.S. in 1996 and moved to Portland brilliantly in 2009. She was born in Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of the Congo. She has a master's degree from Belgium in biochemistry, Orono is calling, and an associate degree in business administration and education. In addition to her role within Her Presence, Mickey has worked as a medical interpreter and with the City of Portland's Schools Multilingual and Multicultural Center. And she's currently, do I have this right, Mickey, the vice chair of the Portland School Board. Yes, no easy feat. So, to Claudette and Mickey and all the volunteers they have inspired, who are changing lives and changing the world, it is an honor to award to each of you the 2023 Courage is Contagious Award. And if you would step up, I have that award here. you like to speak? I'm just going to set these here and step aside.
Thank you, Dee. Good evening, everybody. On behalf of In Her Presence, I have an honor, and I'm so grateful to see everybody in this room, holding this space together. You know, when I turn and see Kathy Lee, I remember when we had our first fundraising event, Kathy Lee told me, Claudette, you have a secret weapon. And that was so meaningful to me because when I see the title Lee is describing about the award, The Courage is Contagious, I think that's who we are. That's who we are. And it's aligned with our mission, the mission for In Her Presence. So thank you, everybody. And when I see Mickey, when I turned to Mickey, and I met her back in 2015, when we did our organization, it's really inspiring, and it was an eye-opener for me. We share a lot. Our professional experience, coming from abroad, our struggle, but our passion and determination and dedication were not stopped. And now we are sharing our satisfaction. We are not going to be limited because of your support, because of your help. I saw one donor, our first donor foundation, who gave us the first grant back in 2015. Deb, she's here. And that is so rewarding. And that's what keeps us moving. Thank you, Deb. Thank you. And everybody, of course, you supported us, and that's what keeps us moving and inspiring and impacting our community. Ending, I would like to thank our team In Her Presence. We love you.
We love you. And she stole the stage, right? Before courage has become contagious, it was a path of resiliency, a path of humiliation, a path of sacrifice. We have sacrificed a lot, like Claudette just mentioned, but we have believed in us, we have believed in our mission, we have believed in our passion, we have believed about what immigrant women will bring to the table. We have believed about our next generation, and we have to move to make sure that we are on the table of decision so we can all grow together as a community. And then today is really happening. We've been recognized. It's something really emotional to me because I remember sometime we've been sleeping overnight just to try to find 2 lines because we are French speakers, finding some lines to try to make a grant. But today, look at where we are. It's because of what we are as a community here at Portland, and we just want to thank you, Lee. Thank you for trusting us. Thank you for believing in us. Thank you just making sure that it's not the color of your skin, but what you have bring as education and passion on the table to make a change happening. Thank you, and we love you.
Good to see you. And this is for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So as you settle back in, let me just say, if you have an urge to make the world a better place in her presence right online. Just a thought. All right, my job now is to introduce the evening's introducer for the speaker. I do love our profession. But this is actually a lot of fun for me because the introducer for Patrícia is Judy Meyer, who has been one of my heroes for years, and I'll tell you why in just a second. Judy is, and I hope I get this right, executive editor of the Sun Journal, Kennebec Journal, Morning Sentinel, and Western Maine weekly newspapers of the Sun Media Group. So far, so good. She is a fellow of the National Press Foundation and the Knight Center for Specialized Journalism. She attended George Washington University, lives in Auburn with her husband Phil, and is an active member, still active, of the Bicycle Coalition of Maine, which at my age I just find annoying. She serves as vice president of the Maine Freedom of Information Coalition and is a member of the Right to Know Advisory Committee of the legislature. A journalist since 1990 and a former editorial page editor for the Sun Journal, she was named Maine's Journalist of the Year in 2003. She was the 2018 recipient of the Judith Vance Weld Brown Spirit of Journalism Award by the New England Society of Newspaper Editors. So I'm going to take a moment of personal privilege and tell you that I first met Judy when I had been appointed to be Chief Justice of the great state of Maine. I had been Chief Justice for about 10 minutes when I received a call from someone I had never met who was with a newspaper. And my response to that, everybody around me in the court system said, we don't talk to them. Just, refer them, there must be someone you can refer them to. And I was just new enough and perhaps stupid enough to say, what could go wrong? So I answered the call. Judy introduced herself, told me who she was, and she told me that a particular courthouse in mid-state Maine was not providing public records as it should. I just sort of learning what this is about, so as I stammered, well, I need a moment to look into this. Judy, let me just tell you that when you are dealing with the public's right to know, Judy is a crystal clear communicator. As I stammered, I'm a lawyer, I gotta look things, I gotta know what's going on. She said, there is nothing for you to look up, think about, research, or consider. They are public records, get them released. And that is how I met Judy Meyer. And she has never pulled a punch in all the time that I've known her, and I have immense respect for everything she does for the public, for all of us, and so I give you Judy Meyer.
Wow, I had no idea I was that intimidating because my children certainly don't see me that way. Thank you very much, Lee. I am truly honored tonight to introduce our guest speaker. Patrícia Campos Mello is an award-winning reporter at large and a columnist at the Folha de São Paulo. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. The largest newspaper in Brazil. She's also a commentator at TV Cultura, which is Brazil's public television. For over 25 years, she has been covering international relations, economics, and human rights, and has reported from over 50 countries. She was awarded the Columbia University Maria Moores Cabot Prize in 2020. It's the oldest international award in journalism and recognizes journalists who have produced a distinguished body of work that has contributed to inter-American understanding through their coverage of the Americas. In 2019, she was awarded the Committee to Protect Journalists International Press Freedom Award, which honors journalists around the world who show courage in defending press freedom despite attacks, threats, or imprisonment. The same year, she was awarded the Vladimir Herzog Special Award for Democracy and Justice. In 2018, she was awarded the King of Spain Journalism Prize, which highlights the role of journalism as a public asset, which it is. And in 2017, she was awarded the International Committee of the Red Cross Prize for Humanitarian Journalism. More recently, she was awarded the National du Mérite by French President Emmanuel Macron, which is an award that's been given for the past 25 years to people from all professions who have rendered services relevant to the Brazilian nation. These are heavy awards for a woman who has produced an abundance of meaningful and compelling journalism, often under very dangerous circumstances. She is the author of the book, which I am not going to pronounce in Portuguese because I have no command of the language, titled The Hate Machine, A Reporter's Notes on Fake News and Digital Violence. According to one book review, the book sheds light on the rapid spread of fake news in Brazil, its profound impact on the political landscape, tracing the history of resentment, propaganda, and misinformation in South America's largest country, and illustrating the exercise of fake news and the political warfare of Brazil's presidential election in 2019, along with the erosion of the freedom of the press in Brazil. I will not reveal too much of her incredible story, but she was personally and professionally targeted by the presidential candidate in 2019 for her coverage of tactics used by his supporters during that campaign, all of which were designed to intimidate her, none of which worked. Patrícia was recently featured in the HBO documentary Endangered, which chronicled a year in the life of 4 journalists working in countries where freedom of the press is under threat. Those countries are Brazil, Mexico, and the United States. Yes, the United States. In addition to her political coverage in Brazil, Patrícia is widely recognized for her reporting on human rights and public health stories, including the Zika virus in 2016. She has also reported on the war in Afghanistan, the Ebola epidemic in Sierra Leone, national elections in India, and the refugee crises in Syria, Iraq, Libya, Turkey, Lebanon, and Kenya. She reported on the elections in the United States in 2008, 2012, and 2016, and covered the 9/11 attacks in New York in 2001 as the Washington correspondent for Estado, the 3rd largest newspaper in Brazil. Most recently, she has reported extensively on the COVID-19 pandemic in Brazil, reporting from public hospitals and shelters for homeless populations affected by the disease. She is a graduate of the University of Sao Paulo. Patrícia holds a master's in business and economics from New York University, and in 21 and 22, she was an associate researcher at Columbia University, working on a project about electoral disinformation and internet regulation. And tonight, as Lee mentioned, she's here to talk to us about sexism lives and the fight for truth, a reporter's story. But first, let's watch a short video clip from the HBO documentary.
Isso aqui é país. Verde, amarelo, azul e branco. Não pode deixar esses caras montarem na gente, não. Quer tá lá falando mal do Brasil. Quer tá lá metendo panja aí Messias Bolsonaro. É mau caráter. Não! Não! Tem que acabar com a Globo. E alguém tinha que peitar. E quem peitou se chama povo brasileiro, o Jair Messias Bolsonaro. Fátima Bernardes é mau caráter. Esses caras têm que ser exterminados. Exterminados!
Brazil is a young democracy. We don't have very strong and established checks and balances. So freedom of the press is fragile.
Folha de São Paulo! Folha de São Paulo! Um jornal patife e mentiroso. Tá saindo, cala a boca, cala a boca. Tenham vergonha na cara. A grande parte só publica patifaria. Não mais fake news.
2 years ago, I covered President Bolsonaro's illegal attempt to influence the election. But since he became president, he has started to attack specific journalists and specific media outlets. So, for half the Brazilian population, I am a whore who trades sex for information.
E olha a jornalista da Folha de São Paulo, tem mais um vídeo dela aí. Ela queria um furo. Ela queria dar um furo. A qualquer preço contra mim.
That's the president of a country saying that a journalist wanted to give her whole in exchange for information against him. And it's part of the strategy to discredit journalists, and especially women.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Please join me in welcoming Patrícia to the stage. Very eager to hear from her.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to pretend I'm not nervous. And it's a very tough act to follow. I want to congratulate the award winners tonight. You're amazing. And I want to thank Kathy Lee for organizing everything and for everything you do. And if I mispronounce your name, Lee, sorry. Lee Softly, the Dean Lee Softly, and University of Maine School of Law for having me. And I also thank you. I was living in New York last year doing a fellowship. So when I came to Maine, people were so nice. I'm like, it's like, oh my God, they smile, they're nice. So I met so many nice people, Mainers, new Mainers. I went to Deering, not gonna get this wrong, Deering High School, Brunswick High School, Tree Street, such amazing stories, amazing people. So thank you so much. I have been a journalist for many, many years, for 25 years, and I covered conflicts in many places, in Libya, in Iraq, in Syria, Lebanon, Kenya, Iran, Afghanistan, so many places. And every time I was talking to people, and they always have the same questions, like, how is it to be a woman, you know, covering conflicts? And I always used to say, and I still say, it's actually such an advantage to be a woman, because we, as journalists and women, we have access to 50% of the population of the world that many times our male colleagues don't, because in many conservative countries, women are not going to be talking to journalists, to male journalists, or they're not going to invite them to their homes to meet their families. So I always thought it's such a privilege to be a woman. You know, we can portray part of the life of the people who are living in very difficult situations, but they have a very rich life beyond the war. So this is something I still believe. And that's why I was so shocked when I realized that in democratic countries such as Brazil, the US, India, Hungary, and many other countries, being a woman and being a journalist made us targets. And this because we saw, and we are seeing in all these countries, the rise of extreme right movements and populist leaders who weaponize social media and manipulate public opinion. And one of the main ways, I mean, it's for them to mold the narrative, you know, to just try to spread or to manipulate the news cycle, they have to discredit journalists. And that's what they have been doing. Sorry, I'm a bit nervous. And this, for me, was a shock. I mean, I realized that I felt, in all those countries where I was covering conflicts, the journalist is a privileged person who is there, but he or she, we can go back to our homes, to our warm beds, and the people who are there, they really, you know, target civilians who have to be there. We're just gonna leave. Whereas in my own country, I realized this, and I was shocked in 2018 when I was simply covering the elections, that it had become dangerous to be a journalist in democratic countries. In 2018, I was in Brazil just covering normal coverage, something I do every election. And because I had covered elections in India and in the US, places where politicians were using voters' data and social media to manipulate public opinion, this is basically what I started doing in Brazil. In Brazil, pretty much everyone uses WhatsApp. I know it's not that common here in the US, but in Brazil, 98%. And what was happening is people were getting messages, disinformation, to disqualify the other candidate or just to spread propaganda. The type of things they were getting, and this is serious, I mean, one of the most widely circulated messages was saying that the candidate who was running against then candidate Jair Bolsonaro, they were going to hand out in schools penis-shaped baby bottles to indoctrinate children. And this is something like everybody got this message. And so I started investigating this and started publishing stories showing that there were assembly lines, like sweatshops of people hired to mass message through WhatsApp, spreading propaganda, spreading fake news. And for me, it was just one more story I was covering, right? But the minute I published the first story, I became a target, and this was very, very different. I mean, I'm a print journalist. I've never been a public person. So I was not used to having, you know, my name, people talking about me. But the first story I published started circulating fake pictures of me. It was a woman who was clearly not me embracing the candidate of the opposition, and they were saying, see, this is the journalist, the communist, socialist journalist, and this is why she is writing all those lies. So this was the first thing. Then next thing were messages, fake messages saying from the Supreme Court saying she was sentenced because she lies, she has to pay X millions because it's been proved that she lies. Then I started getting phone calls Meanwhile, I was publishing other stories. I mean, on the same subject, on how they were scraping data and getting voters' data to micro-target. So messages saying, I'm going to punch you in the face if you don't stop publishing this. Then I start getting messages mentioning my son. My son was 6 at the time. So one of the messages said, if you want the safety of your 6-year-old son, you should leave the country. This is not a threat, it's a warning. And then they started circulating my schedule of events to thousands and thousands of people in the WhatsApp groups, saying, you know, the journalist is going to be in this place, you should all go there and confront her. So it got to the point that I didn't know if I was going to go out, get out of my house, and people would be, you know, I don't know, like a crazy person, throw a bottle at me or something. And they knew my address. And it's very crazy how people really believe this stuff. There was a neighbor, she lived in the next door building, and every time I walked down the street, she would open the window, I think she was the second floor, and she would start yelling, "We love Bolsonaro, you communist whore." She would be yelling. And then the doorman was is the super nice man. He started calling me on the intercom saying, "Patrícia, she's opening the window. Don't leave, wait." Anyway, she was doing this up until 6 months ago. Like every time I was out, she was yelling from the window. So these people were getting those messages saying that I was communist. And just to be clear, Brazil never had communism. Nothing ever, remotely similar to communism. It's not like Eastern Europe, they had, communist dictatorships, traumatized. No, Brazil is a totally made up thing, right? So all this was happening, and I was, the newspaper thought it would be a good idea to have someone with me, like a bodyguard. It was not really bodyguard, but someone to help me not to be walking alone. And that's when I realized, this is all wrong. I'm just covering the elections. This is a democratic country. How can I be scared? And because people know my address, people are calling my phone. But then I thought, okay, if I just keep on publishing and I stay quiet, they're going to stop eventually. But they didn't stop. It actually got worse. One of the president's son, he is a representative, legislator. And at one point in 2020, he went to the floor of the House in the Brazilian Congress, and he said, the journalist, and he said my name, is seducing sources in exchange for damaging information against my dad. This was on live TV. And this went viral because he also made a point of, sharing the video with millions of people. And right after that, he went on a podcast with over 5 million listeners and said the same thing. So you had politicians all over Brazil, like from a councilman in a tiny city in the Amazon, feeling authorized to go online or say things like, yes, the journalist at Folha, she's, a whore. She offers sex to get information. That's how she gets her stories. And then a few days later, the president himself was on live TV. That's the scene from the movie. And he made a pun. In Portuguese, the word for scoop, like an exclusive information, is the same word as whole. So he says she's willing to give her whole in exchange for a scoop. And after that, I can't tell you, I started getting rape threats, like hundreds per day. They made porn montages. It's in the movie. You can see that. It's gross, actually. I was asking Kathy if maybe not good to, I don't ever look at them. Like porn montages with my face on it and saying, all horrible things. Porn videos with my face on it. And this went viral. Like this was everywhere. Everybody was getting those. Everybody could see those. And one of the things I was thinking is, what if my son finds this? what am I going to say? I mean, there's nothing you can say, right? I mean, except 20 years of shrink or counseling, I don't know. That's not going to solve the issue. But still, I thought, this is going to go away. I was not talking about the issue, I was not reacting. The only thing I was doing is every story I published the evidence to the story. So the documents, the spreadsheets, message exchanges, everything that was, original evidence to the story. And then a week later, one other, he has 3 sons. They're all 4 sons, 3 are politicians. Again, went. And then I said to myself, he was doing this, it was not just with me, like several female journalists. It was a very systematic thing. And I thought, first, I'm going to have to speak up. So I did a first-person account telling people all the messages I was getting and the images and the videos and what the politicians everywhere, like all the pro-Bolsonaro politicians were saying, and asking, what would you think if this were with your daughter, your mother, your friend, your wife? Would you think that's funny? And then after that, again, they would not stop. So my reasoning was, we're not, the journalists, the worst thing for a journalist is to become the news, right? We're always supposed to be behind and not being. So I always thought, if I just keep on doing my work, and I was very happy because some of the stories led the judiciary system to change the electoral legislation. So, and at the same time, I was kind of scared, but I thought, this is, I'm getting somewhere. I can't stop. So if I just stay quiet and show the evidence, this is going to go away. But then I realized, no, this is not. And so I decided I was going to sue the president. And I sued the president for moral damages. And his son, and other politicians who were saying the same thing. It was not an easy decision, because then I would definitely become the news, and this is horrible. But we won. We won twice. They're appealing, of course. They're going to appeal all the way to the Supreme Court, but still we won twice. And I thought, after all, it was very important to say that, to show that none of this is normal, right? Like here in the US, you spent 4 years listening and watching to a president say the most absurd, offensive, racist, homophobic stuff, and it's not normal. And this is what happened in Brazil. So I thought, this is what I have to do. And when I think now, the work as a journalist in democratic countries, it's nothing compared to what my colleagues are going through in Ukraine, in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, in Sudan. We're so much better, in a better situation. But we can't let democracies just neglect the free speech, because the idea is, if we start delegitimizing women journalists, discrediting them, this is going to work as a censorship. It is a new form of censorship, right? You're like, I'm not going to speak up, I'm not going to publish, I'm not going to investigate, because they're going to target me, they're going to make porn movies with my face on it. And I have to say, I am not an activist, because I think journalists are not supposed to be activists, right? I think we are much more useful. We can be an activist for democracy without doing activism, just investigating, the budget, where's the money going, where's the corruption. Like I did a lot of COVID-19 coverage in Brazil, so this hospital has no oxygen, people were literally dying of suffocation. So this is so much more useful than pontificating in social media or being always showing your opinion, right? But there's one type of activism that I think we journalists, and actually I hope everyone should defend, which is the defense of facts. Be an activist for facts. This is something my hero, the journalist Maria Ressa, who won the Nobel Peace Prize, she said once, and it just strikes me as so true. We saw what happened in the US January 6, 2021. There was no evidence that there was fraud in the elections, and you had, mobs destroying Congress, and people died. History repeated itself 2 years later in Brazil. January 8th, they're not even creative, January 8th, 2023, they attacked Congress, the Supreme Court, and Presidential Palace, saying the elections were rigged. No evidence whatsoever. If we're not activists for facts, this is going to keep on happening, right? So what we're trying here is to not be intimidated by this new sort of censorship, right? To try to silence, and it's much worse with women and with African Americans and with indigenous, all minority groups are more targeted than white males, so to say. And the idea is to silence criticism, silence investigations, but we need to not let us intimidate because we're going to see other January 6th, other January 8th. I mean, this is here to stay because if you weaponize social media, you can manipulate the truth. So, yeah, I guess this is, I'm sorry, I'm a journalist. I hate to speak in public. I like to ask questions. So, thank you so much for having me here and for being so nice.
Keep your remarks short, it's fine. Give lots of time for questions, and she's unbelievable. She's been answering questions for the last 3 days. So step up and ask your questions on anything she said, other things you want to know about in terms of the press, in terms of Brazil. Please.
Please, someone ask a question.
Step up. Yeah, stand up and come to the mic. Well,
All right.
You said you fought, you won twice. What did you win?
I did not win money because they're appealing, and I'm going to donate the money. But what I won is, one, the sense that in Brazil, democracy was still working because checks and balances. You can't hear?
I think it's on.
Can you hear me now? No?
Okay, tech assistance.
Any idea? I can try to speak louder. Is that better?
Yeah. Well, all right. Yeah, sure.
So the fact that the judiciary, it was actually, the first judge was a woman, that they had the courage to rule against the president was in itself a victory because it showed that checks and balances were still there, right? So it's not really about the money, not that I don't need money, right? But anyway, it's not going to donate the money. It's the fact that it shows it is not normal for anyone, much less a president, offend, insult people like this and spread lies. And I know that my colleagues here in the US, which had some similar experiences in terms of being insulted, the fact that in Brazil he was I mean, the judge decided against him, it's a big deal. So even if, I mean, he's going to appeal all the way to the Supreme Court, but I think the Supreme Court is going to decide, I don't know. But so far, it's really good. We won twice, and it's a really good sign.
So what will happen now that Bolsonaro is back in the country?
Great question. Well, there's two things. One thing, which I also think you guys are going through here, is how do you cover a president after a presidency that was absolutely atypical? Like, we came from Bolsonaro, who was a president with authoritarian tendencies and, you know, racist, homophobic, and then now we're covering a president that is more, he doesn't have any authoritarian tendencies, but he has so many problems, right? I mean, we're still criticizing him. There's still lots of problems. So how do you make the transition? And I think here with, you know, Trump and Biden was the same thing. And at the same time, just like here, Bolsonaro is being investigated in several, he's been targeted several investigations, everything, getting jewelry from Saudi Arabia worth $16 million to, you know, trying to overthrow election results, inciting people to destroy Congress on January 8th. So we have to be careful. There's this sentence of Martin Barron, who was the, I think, editor-in-chief of the Washington Post, that he said once, we're not at war, we're at work. So we're not going to be persecuting or covering harshly Bolsonaro, but we have to try to be balanced and cover. And what's happening now is he's being investigated in several different cases.
First, I want to thank you so much for being a brave woman. This is a good example for us and for me and for my daughter. I really appreciate it. My question is, when you sue the president, where did you do it from here, from America? You did it from back in Brazil. Second, and if you do it from there, were you scared? I'm sure there is a lot of threat in there. So did you escape from there? How did you manage to do all this work by yourself, or you get support from here or from there?
Thank you so much. What's your name?
My name is Maza Mohammed.
Mazama?
Maza, like Mazda without the D.
Okay, cool. Love it. Maza.
Yeah.
And are you from Maine?
I'm originally from Ethiopia.
Okay.
So I escaped from Ethiopia back during the war. So I went to school in here. I'm able to go to school. I didn't learn English. I learned English here. And I got my doctorate degree from the pharmacy. Wow. So I admire you. So I need more empowering woman attitude in here.
Masa, I would say that I admire you, and you had much more courage because Ethiopia used to be, I'm not sure, an authoritarian country, and my colleagues in Ethiopia had a much tougher life, journalists. So I was in Brazil when I sued the president because we were still a democracy, unlike many other countries. So in that sense, I was in a privileged position. Of course, they could be targeting me, but things are still working. And that's why we were so worried about re-election, as you guys were here, because the first thing the president was going to do is increase the number of judges in the Supreme Court. And this would start to dismantle checks and balances. And we saw what happened with re-election in India, in Hungary, right? So in that sense, I thought that it was okay to sue the president while I was in the country because I believed institutions were working. And thank God they were.
Ditto. Thank you so much for being here and for being who you are. But I wanted to ask, In this country under Trump, there was an attack, obviously, on immigrants. And the press did, I think, a really good job of exposing what was going on, even when we couldn't change it. But I was wondering, in Brazil, I know that it can be dangerous to elevate indigenous voices and environmental voices there. And I'm wondering, under Bolsonaro, how did the press react, and what, did they change their coverage, or was the general scene? Thank you so much.
Thank you. What's your name?
I'm Grace, hi.
Grace. Thank you, Grace, for your question. Well, we had a journalist assassinated last year, Dom Phillips. He was the Guardian correspondent, he was a friend. He was investigating trafficking, wildlife trafficking in the Amazon. Basically, during the Bolsonaro administration, the Amazon turned into a lawless place. I mean, you had all kinds of illegal mining. It was just rampant. And I think the media did a very good job of covering this, and it was very dangerous, like covering illegal mining or deforestation or illegal logging. Nowadays, it's a bit better now because there's not this sense of impunity that there was, but we had colleagues die, such as Tom Phillips. Again, in a democratic country, right? Which we think the press is still free. So now the government is slowly trying to, all the environmental protection agencies and legislation were either dismantled or weakened during the Bolsonaro years. So the government is trying to slowly rebuild those, but it takes time. For instance, deforestation figures are not going down yet. So it's going to take years to rebuild all that, everything all the regulations and everything. And I think a good part of it was that the media was exposing how this impunity was acting as, they destroyed a huge part of the Amazon. So I think the media was and I was not there. Many colleagues were, I did a lot of coverages of the Venezuelan refugees in one part of the Amazon, but not environmental coverage. And I think this was really important so that the world, you had many congressmen here in the US, they issued several letters condemning Bolsonaro's environmental policies. This was very important, like the world is looking, right? And this depends on the media exposing what was happening.
Thank you. This is exactly what the courage is contagious, right? To have that courage to stand for yourself. And where I come from Congo, we don't have the freedom of speech, and the press is being all the time under control. And my question is, then, what's the time in your life that you really feel like you have to give up and you were afraid? And you just say, okay, with all the passion, then you have to be a journalist. You say, I may stop right now. And if you have really to encourage girls to go with the passion from the heart and be journalists, what's your advice? Thank you.
Thank you so much, and congratulations again. You have a wonderful doctor in DRC, right? Denis Mukwege? This is really, he's going to be the next Nobel Prize, hopefully, right? Did he win? Oh, he won, right. He's wonderful, right? I remember he was always, yes, when you have, the next door neighbor yelling your name outside the window and people approaching you in the street and saying, aren't you ashamed of yourself? And I'm thinking, I don't know this person, I don't know what she's talking about. It's like, you feel like you're going to be under your bed in a fetal position forever and never leave. That's the feeling I had sometimes. But at the same time, and this is what I say to students, it is the best job in the world. It's so amazing to be a reporter, to speak to all these interesting people and go to places and in your own country. And then sometimes you see that really corrupt politician and you get him and you see, you know, that he's stealing. I mean, it's such a good feeling. I don't know what else I would do. I love being a journalist, and this is what I tell students, like, you're not gonna get rich, it's hard to get a job, but it's so much fun, it's so interesting, so I'm still optimistic, I think.
Yeah. Hi.
If you could say your name.
Yes, Patricia. I'm Ninette, originally from Burundi. Also came here as an asylum seeker 11 years ago. First of all, thank you so much for sharing your story with us and for coming to Maine. To your point, it is a welcoming community. I have seen that. I live here. I went to school here. I am a member of this community, so yes, it is a welcoming community. So my question is, yes, around journalism. As you have mentioned, you have had a privilege to travel the world, to see places and to meet other journalists who don't have the opportunities that you have had or you have right now. And thinking about that and thinking about what's going on in all corners of the world, do you see, and I feel like this is a crazy question to ask, but as citizens of the world, it's really important to understand, yes, there's manipulation, of the data, of the information, but do you really think that they may be out there in the world journalists who are not being honest with us, the citizens of the world? I think it's important that we differentiate the bad apples and the good apples, so that we can know, how to manage that when we read this information.
Great question, Ninette.
Yes.
Well, first, there's journalists who are not bad people, but we make mistakes, right? I made several mistakes. The difference is we're going to correct them, right? And if it's really bad and if we get sued, we're going to pay. With the internet, who are you going to sue, right? I mean, these people, they have no responsibility or, with the truth. They're just spreading anonymously stuff. So, and with journalism, it's very hard nowadays in several media outlets or so-called media outlets to understand what is opinion and what is fact. So you have all these hyper-partisan media outlets, which are basically distorting the truth, right? I did a story about, this was a media outlet in Brazil that was basically two people in northeastern Brazil in Rio Grande do Norte, Mossoró, that they copied news from all over the internet and they repackaged it in an extreme right-wing bias and anti-vaccine, climate change deniers, and their audience was huge because some people just want to hear whatever endorses their views, right? So it's like entertainment. I'm going to pick whichever media outlet that, endorses whatever I want to believe in. So one thing is there is demand for this kind of journalism, the journalism that agrees with your views. And there's a lot of distortion. And the story we did about this was actually with ProPublica, was a partnership, was how Google Ads was monetizing these people. Like people who were spreading this information about vaccines, COVID vaccines, electoral disinformation, Earth is plane that I don't know, Earth is flat, but anyway, all those kinds of, they get ads, and that's how they earn money, because they have audience. So I think the best thing we can do is first check our sources, right? I mean, even if it's really good and you want to believe what's written, is this a hyper-partisan, a very biased media outlet that I like it because it just confirms everything I want to be confirmed? And sometimes the media outlet you're reading, you're not gonna agree with everything. But this is how it is, right? It's not supposed to be entertainment or something you always like. So yes, I think they're honest journalists who make mistakes, and we have to correct them and to pay if that's the case. And there's dishonest or just opportunistic journalists who are catering to an audience who wants to get their views endorsed. And they're earning money with ads, digital ads.
I've heard you talk about this. What do you do about that? How do you distinguish?
There's several initiatives. There's something here in the US that's called Trust Project. Is it Trust? Yeah. Which is very interesting that it talks about transparency. How you have, as a journalist and all the media outlets, you have to be transparent and to tell them, this is opinion, this is analysis, this is factual reporting. And also show as much as you can, original sources. So when you're reading or watching or getting your information, it's good to see to what extent they are transparent and what they're showing, how they are empowering the reader, the viewer, to check for themselves, right? I think this is one good way of checking, but in general, it's hard to, differentiate, right? But we know which ones are professional journalists. They do this as a job, and I guess, of course, everyone has a bias, all journalists, all news media outlets, but at least we're trying to be to the best possible that we can to be balanced and fair, even though we know it's an utopia to be totally impartial, but there's an attempt to be fair, and that's what matters.
Hi, thank you again so much for speaking with all of us. So I have a question about your experience in Brazil. You and your coworkers, I'm just curious about how it has impacted or impeded your ability to get information and access to, like I said, information and even people, because this has been a huge issue within the US. As you were kind of just mentioning, we're living in a time where feels like there's unlimited media. And we used to live in a time where politicians, for example, used to have to engage with the media that existed. And they don't have to anymore. NPR tried to do an interview with DeSantis, and he just said no. He didn't, and because he doesn't have to. He has plenty of people that want to speak to him who are going to say very nice things about him, for example. So I'm just curious about that. Thanks.
Excellent question. I interviewed Steve Bannon. The first time I interviewed Steve Bannon, right after the Brazilian elections, he said, which sounds obvious now, but the only reason what enabled the rise of the populists is social media, because they no longer had to go through professional media that was going to question whatever they're saying, investigate, fact check, right? They could bypass this filter. So, what was the rest of the question? Sorry, I'm getting lost. Oh, yes, data. No, that's super important, yes. So, yes, for the last 4 years, first, our Freedom of Information Act was basically, they were denying all requests, several requests, at a much higher rate than other administration. And they actively tried to either distort or omit information. COVID-19 is a very good example. I was covering COVID, several public hospitals, and also, figures. And at one point, the government started sharing something they called the scoreboard of life. They were announcing only the numbers of people who had survived COVID, not people who were sick or had died, right? And then right after that, they decided that they were going to sort of change the way statistics were being published. So then the media outlets formed a consortium to get the information, the data, directly from the state governments, because that was the only way we could be sure this was actual, because the president was COVID denier, so he wanted to minimize everything that was happening. So yes, I mean, transparency and access to data. And on the other hand, one of the lawsuits I'm facing, because yeah, that's also part of the playbook, is, for instance, like a story I did using Freedom of Information Act, so that's like official documents, I'm getting sued. Which, it's an official document. How can you get sued? So both sides. On the one hand, you try to restrict access to information, and on the other hand, you sue even when, a journalist is using a totally legitimate tool as, official documents.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to have you here, really appreciate it. You just used a turn of phrase, both sides, and recently this question of both sidism has been very pronounced in the mainstream media, and within the last week regarding the debt crisis in this country. And when you look at sources that we've all relied on, like the New York Times or the major networks or CNN, and you can actually, using the debt crisis headlines, see that this both sidism is playing out when there is no both side to it. It really prompts you to wonder, what's the rationale behind this happening? And the only thing that I can think of is this becomes a question of the difference between the publisher and the editor, the pressure to maintain the commercial value of the entity versus the integrity. And here we are in Maine with a threat to our newspaper environment, and not because anybody is being diabolical about it, but because somebody wants to sell their assets. And now this prospect of a nonprofit stepping in, I wish I knew more about it, but it sounds like, wow, is this a model that could be replicated in other places? And it concerns me that, to your point, how do you judge what you're getting? I think even at the top level of journalism, there's a lot to feel, questioning about, and who has the time to calibrate, reporting from a dozen different places? Yeah. I mean, both sidism. That was my question.
What's your name?
Louise Rosen.
That's
Hi.
an excellent question. Regarding local newspapers, I think they are the most important media outlets in the whole world, because they do work that national newspapers are not doing. So I want to speak to Judy Meyer afterwards. I told her I want to hear from you a lot. And both sidism or false equivalence, I remember when I was based in Washington, D.C. for between 2006, 2010. So I covered first Obama election, second Obama election. Then I came back to cover Trump election, whatever. But at the time, we had something like people say, oh, some people say Obama was born in Kenya. Some people say, no, he was not born in Kenya, right? Or not the other day, during COVID, I think the New York Times, even the New York Times got really criticized because I think it was on Twitter, they said, according to some specialists, drinking detergent does not cure COVID. To all specialists, right? So I know we totally, like in Brazil, we had, for the sake of both sides, we had people on news shows, like one particular legislator saying, COVID is, just like a regular cold. Maximum 800 people are going to die. You don't get these people you don't give a microphone to these people, right? There are no both sides for that. Or to climate change, right? You're not going to interview the NGOs, I don't know, paid for by the fossil fuel industry because they have an alternative view of climate change. So I think you're absolutely right. And this is something that was a very blind way of seeing, how to be fair. There are no two sides for everything, right? There's some, and facts don't have two sides. Like, it's either the earth is flat or it's round. There's no in the middle. Having said that, there are several other things like the right to abortion. I might be of the opinion that everybody should keep the right to abortion, but I might have to listen to people who don't think so, because that's a matter of their view, right? Even if I think it's a horrible view. But I think, finally, journalism is understanding that the old way of looking at being fair and balanced, we need to be very careful about not giving space or a loudspeaker to people who are not the other side. They're like lying. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. One of the things that really struck with me is you not giving up, and the other thing was like the idea of trauma and re-traumatization of just reading things about yourself. So my question is around that. So one is, in a clickbait community or society when there's so much happening, how do we, what would be your advice to the readers to close the loop and stay energized enough or motivated enough to stick with the topics that are of interest to them? And then secondly, like, what advice do you have for journalists to, or strategies they can use or implement to ensure that they're not re-traumatizing communities that are experiencing and living these truths all the time?
Thank you. What's your name? Hisha? Okay. Thank you. In terms of re-traumatizing, I just remembered, and I think I was talking to Kathy, when I covered the Zika virus epidemic in Brazil, that was a few years after the Ebola epidemic, and I remember this one scene that really gave me so much shame of being a journalist, that you had the mothers in Brazil, pregnant women that got Zika virus were giving birth to babies with microcephaly. This is something, it's sort of a mystery because it didn't happen in other countries that had Zika virus. But then you had like hundreds of journalists going to this northeastern state, very poor state, and you looked at the hospital, like several journalists harassing mothers who had just, had babies with microcephaly. And I thought, this is not right. This is not what we're supposed to do. So I think this is something we need to be really careful. There's nothing that is worth more than a person's feelings. The story is not worth that much, that you're going to be invasive with the mother who just had a baby that's going to need serious, a lot of care, and probably is a very poor mother in that it depends on public hospitals. One of the mothers I spoke to, and I'm not sure how successful I am, but I always try not to be invasive. It's hard to calibrate. She lived in a city. She had a baby. He had seizures like every hour, and there was no pediatrician in the public hospital. Not one. She had to travel 6 hours. So are you really gonna, insist if the person doesn't want to talk to you? No, you're not, right? So this is one thing. The other thing, what was it? Sorry, I got.
There's so much happening all the time.
Ah.
So, like, how do we really make sure, like, it's not giving up, right? So how does individuals who might not be stakeholders or maybe are stakeholders in so many things, environment, politics, like, how do you keep that momentum going and not burn out?
Because of information overload, or how do you? God, that's a great question. I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, oh my God, there's so much to read. I'm never going to finish. But at the same time, I think if I were not a journalist, I would think, I want to have the greatest amount of information, like accurate information, to be able to decide for myself, to be very conscious. This is a civic thing, right? Like, you're going to read and you're going to have, from your own opinion, after what you read, factual reporting. So if I'm worried about the environment, I think I really want to understand what's happening. And it's sort of homework. I know, it sounds, right, a lot of work.
But at the same time, it is a civic thing, because that's what you need to vote, that's what you need to fight for the environment, if that's what you care about. So yeah, I feel the same way. Like I wake up, it's like, oh my God, there's so much to read. There's so much stuff happening. But then I remember, yeah, but this is good. It's empowering. I want to know what's happening so that I can decide, right?
Thank you, and I'm going to cut the questioning there. She's amazing, isn't she? I just wanted to thank Patrícia again for being our 2023 Justice for Women speaker. She came to us from a journalism conference in Italy, where she had been performing for several days, to New York, straight to Maine, straight to Tree Street in Lewiston. And I think she's immune to jet lag. I don't know, I haven't figured it out. She spent a couple hours with 13-year-old girls who were just in awe, particularly the fact that she sued the president. I couldn't believe it, and won. From there to Bates College, where she had dinner with a group of students, and then was interviewed by Maine Calling Cindy Hahn in front of an audience of students and local people from the Lewiston community. She's just on fire and full of wisdom all the time. I have to thank a few people, our sponsors, Unum, our media sponsor, Maine Monitor, Maine Women Magazine, which put out several announcements saying, come hear the badass Brazilian journalist. The Greater Portland Immigrant Welcome Center helped us to publicize this, along with Maine Women Magazine and dozens of other nonprofits that spread the word. I want to thank, as Lee did, the law school staff for answering my many questions and requests for what are the numbers, how many registered. It's like every other day I made that phone call, and they're very patient with me. I want to thank Soraya Omari, who was our researcher, who is now in Malaysia and was willing to be up at all hours of her day and night in order to participate in phone calls. And my husband, Bob Moyer, who continues to prop me up and push me forward and hold me together as there are highs and lows in preparing this program, especially during the COVID years, but even now to try to get people back and participating and appreciating. Thanks to all the people at Tree Street, Bates, Deering High School, Brunswick High School. She had amazing meetings with dozens of Angolan asylum seeker students. They spoke in Portuguese. And she
danced.
Yeah,
Oops, sorry.
Sorry.
Kuduro.
Kuduro. So she asked about Kuduro, which is like in Brazil, samba. And they broke into dance, turned up the music. But also, thanks to all the aspiring and retiring and active journalists who have helped for the last 4 months to put this program together. The past 3 days, she's spoken to over 1,000 people, and that's not counting Maine Calling, and she's being interviewed tomorrow morning by Greater Portland COG on a podcast, and we will have one more program that you're all welcome to attend if you're interested tomorrow at the Wish Camper Center from 2:30 to 4:30 in the afternoon. It's called Journalism, Justice, and Why Words Matter. We're going to have a high school journalist who's here in the front with Youth Journalism International. We're going to have Judy Meyer who introduced Patrícia tonight, and two young people who run a domestic violence abuse prevention program for youth through these doors. And we're going to have two names that are well known in journalism in Maine, Naomi Shalit, and I mentioned before Judy, and of course Patrícia will be with us as well. The Shepley Community Hall in the Wish Camper Center tomorrow 2:30 to 4:30. And then we conclude on Friday with an overview of what's happening in the press in Maine, or with the press in Maine, and Bill Nemitz is going to present that, and we're going to have an open discussion with Patrícia and others commenting. It's called You Don't Know What You Got Till It's Gone. And warm congratulations to my friends Claudette and Mickey. And I just have to say, you all know it's coming. This is the 12th year. The first one we're face-to-face. We were not for the past 3 years. And we are not immune to inflation or to the vagaries of the stock market, so we are still trying to fully fund the endowment. We're at $450,000. We need another $100,000 to make this program permanent. So I'm going to ask anybody who can, do what you can. There are envelopes as you walk out the door. The law students will be there handing them out. Or just go online and donate to Justice for Women on the Maine law site. So join me again, and thank you, Patrícia, and thank you, all of you, for coming.